Welcome to Feminism Today, everyone. I'm Sophia Johnson in New York. Bangkok-born Swedish-Thai artist Sirintip is an experimental trilingual singer and composer in both the jazz and pop worlds. Her unique use of effect pedals with her voice has brought her around the world, performing with four-time Grammy Award-winning Snarky puppy, Benny Andersson of ABBA, and as a finalist in the Thelonious Monk International Competition, and also opening for jazz great Wayne Shorter at the Polar Music Prize. Through innovative ways of interpreting data and recording recycled material, Sirintip aims to create an empathetic bridge in a polarizing world. Take a listen. That was In My Garden, and it's a song from Sirintip's debut album, Triba. Sirintip, welcome to Feminism Today.
Thank you so much, Sophia.
Your music stretches across 3 continents, and it's an exciting, eclectic body of work that touches on pop, R&B, electronic, jazz, and all the while creating a unique sound that has just never been heard before. Where is your cultural home? Where did this come from?
So I grew up in Bangkok, Thailand, and I lived there up until I was 11 years old. And then I moved to Stockholm, Sweden. And since the past almost 8 years now, I've been living in New York. So I think my cultural home probably is somewhere in Thailand and Sweden combined. But I do now, at this point in my life, I feel the most at home in New York because I feel like it's easy for me to be accepted exactly for who I am here. Versus sometimes in Thailand, I would not be Thai enough, or in Sweden, I would not be Swedish enough.
Yeah.
And in New York, no one is from here, so I get to be myself.
Right. As a sought-after voice, as a sought-after voice in the studio, your music can be heard on over 30 released recordings. I read you sing in 3 languages. How much of your roots is connected to your music?
I would say that a lot of it is, and it's transcending. So I moved to New York because I wanted to study jazz, and New York is the metropole of jazz, and just like a language, it's really hard to learn. Like, if you were to study French, but you're studying French in a classroom, it's very different from if you go to France to study. Yeah. So when I was falling in love with jazz as a teenager, that's when I started singing jazz. And then I continued to study jazz in both high school and then in college. And during my college time in Stockholm, Sweden, I started working at this jazz club called Phasuk, where a lot of American musicians came through. And that's when I really started to understand that if I really wanted to understand the roots of jazz, I needed to move to New York. So that brought me here. But after being here and studying jazz at the Manhattan School of Music and truly understanding that jazz is an Afro-American tradition, I realized that it was better for me to infuse into jazz with my heritage, which is Thai and Swedish. And for the Thai part, it is the language, but it's also the Thai traditional tuning, which is very different from Western tuning. And it's all the Thai instruments. And with my background from Sweden, it's a pop country. Like, we love pop. We write pop songs. Like, all the top 40 songs basically are written by Swedes. And a lot of that is thanks to Max Martin, who pretty much wrote like all the songs for Lady Gaga and Rihanna and a bunch of other part of them, Katy Perry, for instance. So I think that might be the answer to your question of that's how I kind of ended up in this weird blend of, I don't know, not jazz, not pop, not electronic, not
Yeah.
R&B, but all of it at the same time.
All of it, and beautifully at that. Your
Thank you.
talent and musical background have led to some really fascinating collaborations, as I mentioned in the introduction. Jazz great Wayne Shorter, Benny Andersson from ABBA. Tell us a little bit about these collaborations and how they came about, the inspiration for these types of collaborations.
So I was just asked, so for the Wayne Shorter story, the Polar Music Prize is kind of like the Nobel Prize, but in music, and it's given out every year in Stockholm, Sweden. So there was one of the, I think, artistic directors of the Polar Music Prize. He had seen me perform a few years earlier at the Culture Center in Stockholm, and he really loved my music. So when Wayne Shorter was given the prize, this artistic director, he decided that he wanted me to open for Wayne Shorter because of my way of viewing music, which is very open. And for Wayne Shorter, jazz is just, it's a sponge. And I think he has a quote where he says, jazz is, I dare you.
Wow.
And so I think that that was what the artistic director saw that I had in common with Wayne, that I just kind of jump out there and I don't try to label anything, and see every mistake as a new possibility.
Yeah.
And for ABBA and Benny Andersson, that was actually a fundraiser at the Guggenheim Museum for the Royal College of Music in Stockholm. So because I had just moved to New York and I was living here as an alumni, they decided that they wanted me to be a part of that fundraiser performance. So I got to sing Thank You for the Music, written by Benny Andersson, with Benny Andersson.
Very nice.
Yeah. And coming from a jazz background, I decided to, do my own thing on it. He was not into it. So.
Yeah. But it worked.
It was like, just sing the melody, don't jazz it up. I'm like, okay.
That's so funny. That's so funny. Now, as a composer, you've done so much. You've arranged for, as well, the Swedish Radio Symphony Orchestra, musically interpreted the Nobel Prize, and composed a score for the 1925 film The Lost World, which premiered at the Alamo Drafthouse movie theaters across the US. Can we talk a little bit about these unique opportunities? And first of all, let's nerd out a little bit. The Nobel Prize? How does this work? What exactly did you do?
For the second prize, it was for a prize in chemistry, and it was for looking into cells on a really, really close-up level. So I decided to do a musical interpretation of, like, what if we were able to listen inside of a cell? How would the sound inside of a cell be?
Wow.
So I used the imagination to kind of just come up with a track for that, and just think about, like, the mitochondria. How would that sound like? The nucleus.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Tell us about your academic training. You are deeper than most musicians, I find. I read you studied at the Stockholm Royal College of Music. You mentioned that a little bit earlier, but also the Manhattan School of Music. When did you know you wanted to be a musician?
I think I knew at a very early age, but I didn't dare to trust that I could do it up until so in Sweden, it's a little bit of a different education system than it is here in the US. So already in high school, you kind of need to decide which direction you're going to go. So I had, from middle school, I made sure that, like, all my grades were good enough so I can get into a science program for high school. But then I decided to also apply for a music, like, arts program. And it was a type of high school education where it still gave you enough of, like, all the basics. So if I decided for college to do a medical degree, I could. So going into high school, I decided on an art program, but I still had the plan B of, in case I couldn't do it for college, I could go and study and become a neurosurgeon. Then when I applied for college, it was the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to apply for all these, science programs, but then I'm also going to apply for music. And if I get into the music schools, I'm going to do that first. So I got into the Royal College of Music, and that's how I ended up there.
Beautiful. Let's take a listen to a clip from Shut It Up live in the UK. That was a clip from Sirintip's Shut It Up live in the UK. Tell us a little bit about this song.
So Shut It Up was a song that I wrote, I think probably when I was 21 or 22. And I was just really tired of societal pressure, especially growing up in Thailand. There's a lot of pressure. And I think that's tying back to the other conversation about that I wanted to study science and become a doctor, because as an Asian, you're supposed to have a real job, which is be a doctor or be a lawyer, and having an arts career and being a singer is not really something that Asian parents will support. So Shut It Up was coming from that story of that I was trying to break out of the societal pressures of doing something that someone else is telling me to do and doing what someone else is expecting, and just trying to shut out those voices in my brain. So the chorus to Shut It Up in the beginning was actually "Life is too short," but then my producer at the time, he was like, "You're too literal, try to come up with something else." So I was just standing in front of a mic and improvising a bunch of lines. And then I got mad at him, and then I yelled, "Shut it up." And then he said, "That's it."
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a coming of age song, right? It feels like, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but my listening to Janet Jackson Control back in the day, right? So this is a coming of age so for Sirintip, but it's beautiful. I like the idea of shutting it up, right? Just let it stop. And you're singing in English and Thai.
Yes, both.
Yeah. How easy or not easy is that?
To me, it's pretty easy. Vocal technically, it's similar. From a performance standpoint, it's trickier because the background vocals on that song that isn't Thai are pretty important for the arrangement. But as a performer, when I need to do everything myself, it gets a little bit kind of, like, wait, why is she singing the two languages? Why is she not using the same voice? So that's a little bit trickier in a performance way. And also, again, going back to the Thai tuning, that in Thai, there's so many inflections. So like ma means come here, ma means dog, and ma means horse. So when you're composing, then I need to think about the inflection of the words, because otherwise the word will mean something else when I do in Thai. So in English, there's more freedom to how you can write your melody, because we'll still be the same word no matter which direction you go. But that's not the case in Thai.
Yeah. Now, I mean, what I find especially interesting and intriguing is the idea. It feels very global. I don't know what you're saying, but it feels like I'm being pulled into a world that is multilingual, right? That's the world. There's 7 billion people on Earth, and we speak many different languages. So it felt very worldly, and it felt like it felt familiar somehow, because especially living in a place like New York, right? Hundreds of languages on any given day on a number 2 train. And so, right? And so to me, it felt very worldly. That was the thought that came to me when I heard that. I was like, wow, I could be anywhere in the world, and this is the sounds. And it's also more poignant because in some instances you might be in a foreign country. I spent many years in India, and I wasn't fluent at the time in Hindi. And so it evoked the sense of, I need to learn the language. Where am I? Almost like I'm moving in sort of in our world, right?
Yeah.
Was that your intention?
I think so. And just having people in the Western world be more exposed to minorities and minority languages. Like Thai language Thailand is the only place where you speak Thai. It's not like Chinese or Spanish when you do it in many countries. Thailand even has their own alphabet that no one else shares with them. So it was important for me to bring that up. And that's also why I chose my birth name, Sirintip, to be my artist name. And I know it's like hard for people to pronounce.
Beautiful. That's beautiful.
But I think it's important to expose yourself to different types of cultures and languages and minorities to be able to be more accepting towards different of people of different cultures.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. I'm glad you kept that because
Thank you.
it just sounds beautiful on the tongue, but also to the ear. Now, your music, as you just touched on, in many ways upends cultural narratives about Asian Americans in this country, around the world, and positively also highlights overlooked identities and really contributes to this new catalog, new stories of empowerment and resistance in these communities across our country and around the world. Is your work a type of resistance?
Um, I'm not sure about resistance, but definitely empowerment. Everything that I do, and that's why I chose to go a longer path and go to school for music and
Mm,
make sure that I'm composing and arranging and producing myself. Because when I grew up, I did not see women do that. All
mm,
I saw was singers, female singers, and female artists who oftentimes were extremely produced, and became a product of the music industry
yeah,
and of male producers. So by doing everything myself, I'm hoping to inspire upcoming generations that they can do it themselves and they don't need men to tell them that they're not beautiful enough to be on stage, or that they're not musical enough because they might not know what note or have the language to express what they're hearing. So yeah.
So we're obviously in a very interesting moment in American history. The social unrest, stop Asian hate, all of this is
Mhm.
spilling over into the public space. And I feel like in many ways, new patterns of a resistance are emerging. Is your music part of that? There are new narratives emerging about Asian American voices of Asian Americans in politics and society. Do you feel like your music contributes to that in some ways?
Yeah. Okay. I do think that my music is a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think my music is inspiring minorities, not just Asians, but minorities in general, to be able to connect with their culture. I think it's very common as an immigrant, that you're doing all you want is to fit in and to be
Mm,
able to be accepted. And when you need to do that, oftentimes what a lot of immigrants do is that they try to just shave off their culture.
yeah.
And growing up in Sweden, I've seen this a lot with immigrants and refugees coming into Sweden, and then they are trying their best to learn the language. And as a byproduct of that, if they have kids, instead of teaching their mother tongue to their kids, they're trying to teach Swedish, which
Mm.
oftentimes can be broken.
Let's talk about the new music, your new album. After 3 years of climate research and patient self discovery, your forthcoming album, Carbon, is based on the causes and effects of climate change, a subject that's very close to my heart. And as I think about what you are doing with this new collection of music, I'm thinking about the women who came before us, women like Rachel Carson, and all the female activists who've been trying to raise awareness about injustices around this issue, but also the detrimental effect it's going to have on another generation. Can we talk a little bit about what inspired this new musical direction?
Yes. So just like you, climate change has also been close to my heart for a really, really long time. Um, Actually, going back to 2010, I was asked to perform at a fundraiser for Haiti. And so I wrote my first song. It was called Save Haiti.
Mm,
And after this performance, there was a woman in the audience who came up to me and said, "You know what? I've seen so much about this on the news, but nothing really connected with me as much as your song."
mm,
And I think that was the first time when I started to realize the power of music and how much music can transcend and really connect with people, on an emotional level. And after that, I started to write more songs concerning climate change and planet and humans and all these things, but sometimes it would not really connect with people in a way I would want to do. They would get discouraged.
mm.
So I took more time to just think about how can I write about this and make sure that people are connecting with it and being inspired by it. So that's what Carbon is about, that I've found a way to tie in the concepts to the music, but without really putting it in the lyrics. So for one of the songs that touches on plastic pollution, I used plastic trash from my kitchen. I sampled it and turned it into a percussion set. So when
Wow.
people are listening to the song, they're like, wow, the drums sound really cool. What's that? And then hopefully they will go to my website and be like, oh, let me read about this song. And then they'll realize, oh, it's plastic trash. Oh, she wants me to read about plastic pollution. What's that about? So that's what the record is about, finding other ways of connecting.
Yeah, very nice. I read you spent 9 days at Manifold Recording Studio in North Carolina, taking full advantage of its carbon neutral solar powered atmosphere and location. How did that come about?
That is such an incredible studio, and it's so beautiful, and it's amazing that it's completely solar powered. A lot of studios, especially in New York City, they will, people would have a building or a space, and then it would be like, okay, let's put a studio in here. But none of the studios are really meant or built to be a studio. There's just like a studio room within a building that already existed. Versus Manifold, it was from the very beginning built to be a music studio. So the acoustics of it are incredible. And on top of that, it's solar powered. And a lot of times when you're working in the studio, they tend to keep the equipment on all the time. And that uses a lot of energy. So it was amazing to find a studio in North Carolina. And I found it through my manager, Chris Davis, who knows the owner of it. And his name is Michael Tiemann.
Very nice. Now, I read your music is heavily informed by research that often features a mathematical expression as a vessel for artists to develop patterned ideas and also to improvise. Math, music, I tell it to my daughter, but let's hear it for the record.
Yeah.
For the record.
So for one of the songs where I wanted to write about the rising global temperatures, I actually went to NASA's website and I took data from 1880 up until 2012.
Yeah.
And then I used a website browser app that's called Two Tone. So you can just pretty much insert any kind of data you want, and then they would translate into pitches. And you can completely customize which key you want to do it in and which type of musical modes. If you're having a more theoretical knowledge about music, that you can understand that, like, for instance, a minor scale versus a major scale that gives different types of emotions. So I use that as a way of finding a different way of communicating this data. And because the rising global temperature has pretty much been the same, and then from 1980s it's gone up significantly. I felt like it would be a very obvious piece if it was just like, duh. So I decided to instead choose years that were significant to me and put them in a specific pattern where each year is a specific temperature as well, and to have a diagram to show that visually when people are listening to the song. And then to make it even more clear that it's data driven, I sampled my own voice and played it on my keyboard instead of singing it.
Nice. Let's play a track from the new album, and then we can talk a little bit about it.
When the silence comes to fall, don't know how to hear the music. I throw my head against the wall. Why on earth would I refuse it? Did I lose it?
That's a track from Sirintip's new album, Carbon. Tell us about that piece.
Was that Hydrogen that you played? Okay. Hydrogen is based on the idea of hydrogen in the future could become a renewable energy source. So when I was working on that piece and Googling hydrogen, it's very interesting that it's the most common element in the universe.
Yeah.
But hydrogen, even though it's the most common element, it does not like to be alone. It wants to bind with something else.
Wow.
So I wrote the lyric based on that idea of that, like, I'm the king of the universe, but I don't want to be alone.
Yeah. I love that. I also read, you're so involved in so many amazing things. I read that philanthropy is another important piece of your portfolio and work that you are deeply passionate about. And during the pandemic, you participated in Live from Our Living Rooms, the first jazz festival of the quarantine era, according to Rolling Stone magazine. Importantly, you raised $140,000 to help musicians impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. What do you think the impact of COVID-19 has been on artists? And also, how did this, how do you think musicians are coping in this era?
For me, that was my coping mechanism because just earlier in 2018, that's when I released Tribus. So both in 2018 and 2019, I was touring a lot. And 2020, luckily, that was supposed to be my writing year. So I already had cushioned in a lot of time to be at home and to produce and write. So I wasn't relying as much on performances. So going back to my husband, who had based his entire year on live performance, and other musicians I knew who had just released their debut albums and were super excited to finally share this with the world. When they lost everything, I felt like it was important for me to do everything I could to help, and I had the means to help. So it created an opportunity for me to try to, with Tana Alexa and Owen Broder, to create Live from Our Living Rooms and create this platform where artists can create and be connected, and also to connect with audiences. So the first festival was actually already up and running, I think, on April 1st of 2020.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the peak of COVID, and everyone was at home. So we had a lot of people tune into the live streams that we put on. And actually, during Bill Frisell's performance, the platform we were using called Crowdcast, it broke.
Wow.
Because there were too many people who tuned in to watch it.
Yeah. I remember the craziness of crashing websites. What should advocacy and activism look like in an era of social change and social unrest and climate injustice?
I think, and this is just my personal opinion, I think it's good for everyone to do some of the work. I think in the past few years, we've noticed that there's been a lot of unrest and a lot of things that are not as good as they can be. And I think I'm seeing that a lot of people are also being fatigued, because it is tiring and it is mentally hard to see all the things that are happening. And I've, for instance, myself, feel like I'm not doing enough. Like, oh, there's this crisis and this crisis and this crisis. And at the end of the day, I think it's also important for us to just be kind to ourselves.
Yeah.
So for me, I've kind of tried to do my best to do research on as much as possible, but then I've chosen to kind of be more of an advocate for climate change and dig deeper in there. And I think maybe that can be something that's manageable for people, that if we all kind of find our little thing that we do a little bit more in, a little bit better in, then that would just help everything become better and more kind. We need kindness. That's like the key.
We need kindness. I'll hold on to that. Acclaimed singer and composer Sirintip's new album, Carbon, is out October 14th, 2022. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for our program today. Remember, you can follow me and the show on Instagram or Twitter. Thank you so much for watching Feminism Today on Free Speech TV. Join us again next week.